The Melbourne Symphony Orchestra respectfully acknowledges the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, the custodians of this land. On this unceded land, we celebrate the oldest continuous music practice in the world in our language of music. We honour this country and offer our support to elders past, present, and our shared future. Well, welcome everybody to the 2023 Melbourne Music Summit. This event is proudly presented by Emirates, principal partner of the MSO, and supported by the Department of Education Victoria through the Strategic Partnerships Program, City of Melbourne, Crown Resorts Foundation, and the Packer Family Foundation. My name's Benjamin Northey. I'm the Principal Conductor in Residence of the MSO, and with me this evening is the MSO's Creative Chair for Learning and Engagement, Dr. Anita Collins, and Conductor, Artistic Director and Educator, Ingrid Martin. We are excited for a robust discussion, people, around the topic of are orchestras still relevant to students today? And having some fun with the questions that you have sent us, which I think, Anita, you have next to you. So let's get started, and over to you to moderate and with the first question.
Excellent. Thank you and welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see everyone here. Something struck me. We have a whole bunch of questions here which we haven't seen, so we're not prepared, but we're three people who would never walk onto a stage and not be prepared for what we're doing. So anything could happen this evening, but we're hoping we've got some really, really great questions. So number one, what would be your three go-to banger orchestral pieces for students to listen to live? Okay, go Ingrid.
The first I would say is The Firebird by Stravinsky.
Damn, that was going to be mine.
I stole it.
Okay.
Because it's so spectacular. It's got everything. It's got so many colours, all the dynamics, all of the excitement, so many different tempos and emotions that it goes through, as well as the fact that it's connected to a story, which I think is really useful for young people who maybe aren't familiar with more abstract program music. And I think it also has so many ties to the sound world of film music that are really easy to build a bridge between what students already know and bringing them into the world of our wonderful orchestral music. So I'll give you one, you can get one from someone else.
Do you want to throw one in?
Well, I was going to say Stravinsky too, The Rite of Spring would be another one. It's just impact. I think with young listeners you want impact, don't you? And finale of The Pines of Rome, you know, like if you want to blow somebody's mind, or listen to the Dies Irae of the Verdi Requiem, something like that with the big bass drum. It's kind of heavy metal music for orchestra. I mean, where do you start? Beethoven, all of the Beethoven, you know, there's so much to talk about with that music and the emotions that I think younger listeners can really connect to. And, but yeah, endless possibilities.
I think one of mine would definitely be Carmina Burana.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's so emotive and it has so many different parts. Similar kind of idea as you jump from one idea to another idea to another idea, and being able to understand. You could sit there and listen to it without even knowing anything about it and it's still moving, and then you could understand all of the text and all of the stuff behind it and it would still be moving but in a different way. So that's one of the powerful ones, I think. I don't know a particular piece, but there's something about, like it's not necessarily an orchestral piece, but pieces where there's a single player on stage or a single player with a solo. I know that sounds strange, but it's how does someone hold a stage and hold an audience, I think is also really amazing to watch that happen as well.
And, you know, the other thing I've noticed is when younger listeners see a young soloist, you know, like that's great. If you can find a clip online of a young soloist with the orchestra and they're seeing themselves up there, I think that's very powerful as well.
I think another one I really think is important, it's a totally different style, but it's actually the Mozart Requiem. Again, there's something about it that is so complete, and that's amazing to watch that live. It's not the same in a movie or a soundtrack or anything like that. It's amazing live.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that almost all the pieces we've picked, apart from your idea of the soloist, are things that are really big and loud and have huge forces, like even choir has been mentioned quite a few times, or just that sheer impact of the sound is something that you can't get from a recording, even if you have the world's most expensive speakers. And that force of the sound, I think, is something so special about coming to a live orchestral performance that you can't get in any other way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last one I'll throw in, because it had such an impact on me when I was a teenager, was Debussy Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, which we did the other night in that keynote address. I found that unbelievably transporting, and just because it's so abstract and it's a little bit, you know, inaccessible, and you have to find out what the poem's about and all that kind of thing, and the sounds are so beautiful and subtle. That had an equal impact on me as something like The Rite of Spring, and I think that's another great piece to listen to.
I'd probably add in, now we're just going to come up with a list, Scheherazade.
Yeah.
I was thinking that too, because it's got that contrast between everybody and then a soloist, and you keep shifting between those two perspectives, the sort of wide lens, if you like, and then the close-up shot, which
and I
is
love
really
how
cool.
every instrument gets a go, and they get the go with exactly the same theme, but most of the time they will play it slightly differently, and that's wonderful to watch.
The planets would be another one.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah.
we could keep just going on this one.
Endless.
Maybe we should stop, go to the next one. How does that sound? What can teaching orchestral music do to benefit students that other forms of music can't?
I guess it's the scale, isn't it? I mean, it's, you know, how many other ensembles are that big? And how many sports teams are that big, for instance? None that I can think of.
No.
So there's no other collaborative experience that size, on that scale. So for people to be listening to each other and working together, that's probably the obvious thing from my perspective.
Yeah,
anyway.
I think mine would be so many different, so part of that largeness is so many different instruments having to work together, and then that wonderful moment where you have two instruments playing together and they're playing the same thing and they get perfectly in tune, and you get this third sound. And that idea, that teaches so much about sound and what music can do and what composers can do with music. What do you
Yeah, I think we could put it through that idea of teaching orchestral music through several different lenses. So it could be about actually having an orchestra at your school, and what is that collaborative experience like if you're sitting there and you're playing the violin? How do you work in the team with the rest of the violin section? And then how does that section work within the whole orchestra, like we've been talking about? But then I think there's also teaching orchestral music from, say, a classroom perspective, or even an instrumental perspective. In an instrumental lesson, if you're doing excerpts, understanding the bigger context of where those excerpts come from can really expand a student's understanding of music and point of view from, oh, well, I've just got these few notes on the clarinet and they don't seem very important. But then when you understand what your role is in the story, that takes the learning to another level. And then in that classroom context, it has again got to do with that scale of when else would students get to hear music of that kind of complexity, both in terms of the mechanics of it, but also like the emotional depth and the opportunity to explore things that particularly young people might find hard to express verbally, but we can share and explore through music is something really special.
That's the thing about music, isn't it? It does so much at once, and the orchestra's times, 100 as well. But if you want to teach a young mind a lot of things simultaneously, you can't do any more than put them in a large ensemble situation, whether it's an orchestra, band, or whatever. So, and I think you can still do that in a small situation, like a quartet or a rock band or whatever. But the orchestra is somehow different. You're dealing with history, you're dealing with geography, you're dealing with emotion, you're dealing with creativity, discipline. You can just keep going through things that music, ensemble music teaches you. Empathy, the social skills, humanity, I mean, it's endless. It's endless.
I think what's also I find interesting about classical music particularly is it teaches what a particular cultural group or country believed was beautiful at that given time. The sheer history that we have of music that we can go through, and you can listen to a piece and go, well, that's Russian, and they believed these things about the beauty of the sounds, but also there's a history that's informing it. Then there's something that's from a French composer at a particular time, and that's what beautiful was to them. So it can take students far beyond the music part of it. It can take them into the human condition and what does it mean to be human, because that's what we've made. We've made music out of what it means to be human.
Very true.
And next. Oh my Lord, this is long. In recent years, there has been a huge shift in our schools from orchestras to an American-style program with wind bands and string orchestras. Only a relatively few schools attempt to maintain full symphony orchestras. Whilst this change gives benefit in terms of quicker results, convenient keys, not for the flute players, I would say, the current approach puts students on a path which is limiting, especially in the aesthetic sense. Is there a good case for bringing back the school orchestra?
Can I jump in on that?
Go.
Well, the first thing I would say is I would probably contest the statement that bands and string orchestras are aesthetically limiting, because these are very popular mediums and there are so many ensembles out there that are working in that way, and as a result there are so many composers writing really high quality music for those groups now that there's sort of no excuse to play bad music in a school band or a school string orchestra anymore. So I would take issue with that. But I think all of those different groups give different experiences to students, and I don't think that one is necessarily better or worse than the other. And it would be great if students could get all those different experiences of what is it like to just be in a string orchestra? What is it like to be a string player in a symphony orchestra? As a wind player playing in a concert band, you have a totally different role if you're in a section of 8 flute players than being the one person on your part in a symphony orchestra. So they're just teaching different musical experiences and different skills that all are really relevant and useful, I think.
It's a big challenge, isn't it? And the pace that you learn a string instrument at is different. And if you haven't had a primary school music program, a string music program, it's going to be very difficult for you to have string players ready to play in an orchestra in 3 or 4 years. It's just really hard. The wind bands, you know, that's how I got my ensemble training. And I really value that time and that experience. Our school in Ballarat College was known for its music program, but it didn't really have an orchestra. So it had almost every other kind of ensemble, but it was just because we lacked the numbers of string players. And that's the great challenge. So, yeah, I'm sort of with you, Ingrid. I think ensemble, you know, learning can be experienced in many different kinds of formats, and you're still learning the same things. And the band thing, you know, it's more instruments. It's you know, less exclusive in terms of the instruments that may be called upon to play. So it maybe casts the net a bit wider if you can run a simultaneous string program.
You wouldn't have got much a go on the saxophone in the symphony orchestra at school, would you?
No, well, I was playing flute back then, but yeah, but exactly. That's the thing. Yeah, the band is it's just more instruments. It's just more wind and brass instruments, at least.
Yeah. I think I agree with both of you, and particularly about actually that they're training different players in different ways. You're right, to have good string players up at an orchestral level or to start doing some of those really well-known pieces, you need to have started these kids at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they need to have had that experience. You know, wind and brass start around the age of 10-ish, and they need to play in band ensembles in order to get the confidence so that when you pull that one flute player out and go, now you've got this one bit to play and you've got to nail it every time, that they have that confidence for that. So I think, yeah, maybe the answer is running both of those simultaneously, developing those different skills, but always keeping in mind that the orchestra is that, not the pinnacle, but many of those things coming together. And I think we need to keep supporting that idea, and I think there's definitely a place for it. And bringing them into places like this to perform so that they can really get that sense of the music they're making.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things is that as a music teacher myself, running ensembles and running a music department is really hard. And there are so many moving parts, and it might even just be we can't get everyone in the same room at one lunchtime every week. So I think finding creative solutions about how you could give your students a full orchestral experience is also really important. So maybe it's not a group that runs all the time every week, but it's a special project that you do for one term. And we do this instead, and the students that are not involved in that symphony orchestra get to do something else. Or we do it just for one piece in one concert each year, and that those students can then still get those different skill opportunities, but it's not a huge administrative burden, and it's also not a huge time burden for students, because we all know music students are usually ultra keen beans and they love to be in everything, and I think we always need to be really careful about students looking after themselves and managing their time well, which can sometimes be tricky when you want to do everything.
Yeah,
that was me, I know.
All right, these are good questions. Thank you, everyone. Does orchestral gaming music have a place in the classroom?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is how people experience the orchestra for the first time. Film, television, media, and gaming is the biggest media of our generation, bigger than film. There are a lot of talented people working in that world, and that, you know, where the money is where the talent goes a lot of the time. My son is 9. He's a massive gamer, and he's putting together currently a playlist of a concert for young kids. Wow. Of orchestral music that he's found in his games I've never heard of, not the big franchises, but these niche kind of games. So he's connected with the orchestra through that almost exclusively, and has a completely different understanding than I do about that world. So yes is my answer.
Yep. What do you think?
Yes. For all the reasons that Ben said, I think for so many people, like you said, game, film, music, TV is the gateway to hearing orchestral sounds for the first time. And why wouldn't we start with that gateway, whether it's in a classroom context or in your ensemble context? You know, if a student comes and says, I want to play the theme from World of Warcraft, awesome, let's use that as an opportunity to learn how to play by ear or how to find sheet music on the internet, anything.
Talk about the instruments, you know, put on a game theme played by an orchestra and you've got the class, right? And then it just starts, well, what sounds are we hearing? Let's go through them. This is this and this is, I mean, you know, sound recognition, it's got a role to play.
I still remember a student who came to me, I think he was about in year 11, so he was 17 or so, studying orchestral music, and he suddenly, he was a gamer as well, and then he suddenly came into class and he went, I was really bad at my game the other day because I was just listening to, there was motifs and there was sequencing and repetition and all these other things that you've changed gaming for me forever. It's like, I'm so sorry, but not really. So I think there is a place for it. It's very important.
I think the other thing about game music and film music as well is that it's such an obvious connection between emotional state and the sounds that are being used. And it's a great opportunity to open up that discussion of, okay, well, what's happening in the game at this point? Why do you think these sounds are happening now? What is the composer trying to get you to feel? What are the designers trying to get you to feel here? Oh, well, it's really exciting and the music got faster and it got louder and we had more instruments. Oh, but now I've gone to another level and everything's suddenly become quiet and smooth. Why do you think that choice was made? So, and another opportunity to talk about artistic choices and how composers' choices influence how we feel, which is really, you know, why we're all here, because music makes us feel cool things.
Yeah, cool. The answer is yes. If my school allows only one music excursion a year, why should I choose an orchestral concert over other genres?
Do you want to go?
Sure. I think related to some of the things we've already talked about, this might be the only opportunity that those students get ever in their life to hear a symphony orchestra live. And it might be something that their parents can't take them to, that their parents don't know about, their parents are not interested in. Tickets are expensive. So the opportunity to come as a whole group might be the only chance they get to hear an orchestra. So I think that's a great reason to do that, as opposed to there are lots of other music activities that can be accessed outside of school that they might be more likely to engage with outside. But this might be a very special occasion.
Yeah, I also think there's something, like the orchestra is an important part of it, but more often than not it will be in an orchestral venue. And there's something about, again, just once walking through those doors and being in a space like this where the sound resonates, where it's a really different experience that unless you have a reason to walk into one of these spaces, you might not ever do it. And I think when we have kids are young, that's the time to do it. So these spaces aren't scary anymore and orchestras aren't scary, and it's not for those people over there. It's something that they've experienced in their education, and they've understood that it's just another way of experiencing music.
Yeah, I think the other thing is to pay credit to the great work that is being done by orchestras in presenting engaging concerts for young people as well, like the stuff that MSO's done, and all of the orchestras really here in Australia and around the world. They're very, very well designed, and they're compelling experiences for young listeners, regardless of whether they are into music or not, you know, and I've just seen so many reactions from young listeners to education concerts, that have been presented and are friendly experiences, and unpack the music and talk about the instruments, and everyone goes away thinking that was really great, that was worthwhile. So they're a very compelling musical experience for young people, I think.
Absolutely. We're going well. Okay. Attending an orchestral concert can be quite an intimidating experience for a young concert goer. What can we do to prepare them without perpetuating the stifling atmosphere and the hardcore audience that the hardcore audience creates? What can we help them do?
Yeah, well, I've got thoughts on this.
Do you want to start? Kick us off.
Might not have a career after this. We need to rethink the way we present our concerts. So, yes, the sit and listen and don't make sound, and it is a tough ask for audiences, and some people, that's what they want. But realistically, I think people's expectations of their arts experience have evolved significantly in the last decade or two.
True.
Other art forms and arts companies are presenting concerts in very creative ways that are different than they used to. Technology's been introduced. There's, perhaps other ways to get people inside the experience, to break down the barrier between the stage and the audience, and make them a bit less intimidating for people that we can look at. But everyone needs to feel welcome. If somebody comes along, so the only way you develop an audience is by having someone who's never been there before come along and want to come back, and ideally bring their friends. So that's what audience development looks like. Audience development isn't getting more people who already know what the orchestra does to come. It's actually getting the people who don't know what the orchestra does to come in bigger numbers. So that's our challenge.
Yeah. I think that whole, I didn't know what to expect, but it was really good. That's what we need people to walk away. And it is, in some cases, it's breaking down those barriers, and we have to behave a certain way. And then I also think it's about the repertoire and the variety. MSO does that incredibly well, but a lot of orchestras do it really well to do that. I think I would add it's a really difficult thing that people, when we have young kids in particular who come and sit in wonderful seats and they see a big orchestra, they've been told by teachers you have to sit still, which is really hard when you're 7 for a long period of time. Yeah. And I think we can do some things as educators of helping the kids talking about it as a calming your body so that you can open your ears, or making it an experience where they're actually involved and connected with, and it's their connection to the orchestra, not what should they be doing or which teacher's watching me or anything like that. I think, and having them in the seats and the space and explaining what the space does is also really good, I think, for kids to then fully get into what it is and then make it their experience, which is the biggest thing we need to do, I think. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it's a two-way street. I think there's definitely a lot of value in preparing the students for what it's going to be like, and you're going to come into this room and there's going to be lots of exciting things going on, and you're probably going to want to move around because music makes you want to move, and that's cool. And also for us, whoever it is that are on stage, to be as welcoming as possible to, especially in a children's or education concert, that variety of behaviours and experiences of the music, and that we are okay with people dancing in the aisles and kids conducting from their seat, which is so adorable and gorgeous, and I love every time I see that. But that we are excited because that means that they're engaging with what we're presenting. So I think it's about us as presenters being really clear about what good engagement looks like, and it might not be that sitting really still and keeping to yourself and being quiet. And I think the challenge is that we have, like you mentioned, Ben, people who love the orchestra and they want their experience to be that silent, only focusing on the sound, but we're living in a multi-sensory age right now where we're so used to getting inputs from lots of different sources. I think trying to work out how we manage those sort of two different types of audiences and helping them understand each other's expectations is important.
Because it is a shared experience, and that's one of the best things about what we do, is we're offering a shared experience to the audience, and that's what they really want. They want that sense of we're experiencing this together, so the audience are connected in that way, and that is hard, I think, because people have got different expectations about what a concert is. You know, even simple things, like I would never condone this, but when we say the use of, you know, flash photography, obviously, you know, but, you know, mobile phones and videos is prohibited. I'm like, how many concerts, how many other things,
musical events,
actually do that? Like, we want them to be taking videos. That's actually what we want. We want Instagram to be flooded with videos of people at classical music concerts going, oh my God, this is incredible. That would be the best thing we could possibly do. And yet no way is that going to happen.
I think it's the changing over of what an evening, you know, concert for an audience who knows the orchestra very well and has expectations, how that's different for when students are doing it. I know I went to an orchestral concert, and afterwards they had one of the double bass players used to come down close to the audience, and the kids were allowed to come up and talk to him. And then I talked to one of the kids when they came back. I said, how was that? And he went, guess what? He's not a robot. And so this student really thought that they were robots on stage, and the fact that he got to talk to him and things like that, and seeing kids waving from, you know, the gallery, and the second trombonist waves back, the glee that comes with that. So I think connection, making them feel like they're not robots and that they're people that they are just like them.
Last point from me, at least on this, sorry. So I remember Sydney Symphony Orchestra doing the Meet the Music concerts on Thursdays, and it was schools mainly. But there were people who came to those because of the energy of the room, of the audience. And it was more informal, and I remember the orchestra wore shirts and stuff, and it was kind of like their education concert, but it was part of their week. And so it's just a regular concert. But that was a special energy that the young people brought, and it was a little bit riotous and that kind of thing. But
didn't
they
quite know what was going to happen.
Loved it, and you had other audience members there because of that atmosphere. So that's an interesting thing to do.
Maybe something we should embrace a little bit more of the chaos.
I think the other thing that's special, that's connected to what you were talking about, Ben, of everyone having this collective shared experience, is that we know from the research that when people are all in one place experiencing something together, that our nervous systems co-regulate with each other, and then we sort of come to this shared consciousness almost. And that coming to a concert where maybe the only thing that you can focus on is people who might be almost 100 metres away from you, that is so different from the multi-screen, multitasking world that we have all trained our brains into. And that experience of having to focus on one thing for more than even 30 seconds is really challenging for most of us right now. So I think that's something that everyone has the opportunity to experience, is this moment of singular focus, which we know is really good for our brain because we don't do it enough now. But that we have to prepare people for that, whether they're little people or bigger people, that this is a distraction-free experience. But if we are going to have phones because we want everyone to post all over Instagram about the awesome time that they had, understanding that there might be people doing that in the audience while you're trying to have a single focus experience. And that's just an opportunity for you to get better at focusing. I mean, can you imagine providing, how many other situations do we have now, especially for students, that provides them with an opportunity to be present in one place for a period of time? And because of all the distraction and all the multitasking and the different things, we may not have that. So maybe that's why it's an evolving importance to bring students to orchestral concerts. Well, and that's the same about ensemble as well. If you think about the time in a student's week, that's probably the longest uninterrupted time that they don't have a device in their hand.
Very true.
Which is kind of terrifying now, because we didn't grow up with them. But what a cool opportunity that we have that time for us who get to stand up in front of school ensembles.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. How does learning classical music concepts translate to other genres that students may be more interested in? Oh, that's loaded. It's got a lot in it.
It's just the tools of music, isn't it? I mean, it teaches you the building blocks. And there are so many classically trained musicians out there in all forms of music. And people, now the genre thing is just really almost an anachronism. Great music exists in many styles and genres, but the tools of music can be taught, studied and learned, and in Western music at least, that's the tradition of classical music. That's a good starting point for any musician who wants to do anything. You don't have to, but surely it's going to be beneficial, I would have thought.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's, like Ben was talking about those tools, classical music probably requires you to use them in the most complex way. And there's probably lots of genres that I don't know enough about that might be an incorrect statement. But I think if you've had that experience of using and understanding and getting the foundations of those tools in a classical context, pretty much any other genre is going to be easier. And so you're going to find that it will come more readily and you will be able to just slip into that musical context.
Yeah.
Of course, there's also skills that we don't do very much in Western classical music, like improvisation, that are really critical and absolutely expand a young musician's opportunities and ways that their body and their brain work together that we could maybe bring the other way as well.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you. The challenging nature of classical music and how there's so much variety of the same building blocks means that I would love my students to be able to go out and hear something they've never heard before and use those building blocks that they've learnt through classical music to then go, this is different, I'm understanding this is a challenge, and at least be able to name some of those and give them, see how things are relating, and that's just what classical music does. It's the building blocks of music, just like all music is, but it does challenge and give you probably the most variety in there.
I think it's the same thing as if you were you'd learned a second language and then you tried to learn a third language. That usually that third language is going to be easier, even if it's from a completely different group, because you understand the concepts and the mechanics, and then you're just applying that to a different domain. I think that relates with music as well.
Yeah. And if we took all the music stuff away and we looked at the concept of creativity and innovation, that's exactly what it is. So really, we're preparing the innovators of the future. And with that, where we got to go? How could we provide a well-rounded view of the wide span of orchestral repertoire without having to focus entirely on dead white men?
Good point.
Very good point.
I'll answer first. Yes, there are so many wonderful composers of different genders out there to discover, that have been discovered, are being performed more and more all the time. Music of incredible quality, and there's always a story to tell about why they've been neglected. And I feel like that is a powerful story for particularly young women to hear, and non-binary people to hear. My mind goes to composers that are often played on ABC Classic, people like Hildegard von Bingen. We've got a huge list of Australian composers, Peggy Glanville Hicks, Anne Boyd, Margaret Sutherland, the list goes on. They're just everywhere, and contemporary composers as well. But I go back to Lily Boulanger, who, French composer, turn of the century. She died at the age of 24, was absolutely brilliant and a genius composer. And her music just wasn't performed in the 20th century and is only now being performed again. Florence Price, the African-American composer in America, writing from that perspective in the 1940s, 30s and 40s, like really early symphonies for Chicago Symphony Orchestra, never played. Now people starting to rediscover. So there's music out there if you go looking hard enough, and yes, the hegemony is real and it's been ridiculous for way too long, and it needs to change.
What do you think?
I think it's really important, as the question asker alluded to, that we show our students and our audiences, whoever that is, the full variety and diversity and breadth of compositional voices that are there, because part of experiencing orchestral music, like you mentioned, Ben, is seeing yourself. And we want all of our students to be able to see themselves in the music that we play and that we study and we listen to. And, you know, you're focusing mainly on the male part, but I think there's also the dead part to contend with, that people see live composers and know that composers are real, living, breathing human beings that they can see on stage, or that they could send an email to, or that they could see on their Instagram channel, that these are people whose life is about creating music, and that's really special. People that are reflecting contemporary struggles and issues that our students are dealing with in the music that's being written today, I think is so important and inspiring for students to see, oh, someone wrote that last week. That's amazing. As opposed to, oh, that was written 400 years ago, which has its own interest to it as well. But we need to be, I think, all uplifting and celebrating the voices of composers now, and also thinking about those composers that we still love and admire from such a long time ago, that they've come through all these filters of time and history, and that back then there was a giant diaspora of composers that were writing that we don't now play or hear very much. And that's going to be the same of today's music in 100 years from now. That not all of the music is fantastic. That's just the nature of art. No one can make fantastic art all the time. And so while we're exploring this stuff, we're going to find stuff that we think is amazing, and it might be remembered as amazing in 100 years from now, and there might be stuff that isn't as great, and that's just part of the fun of experiencing art.
I think we're in such an exciting time, because that of discovering, rediscovering, really, pieces that were played and then haven't been played since, bringing those back, going through that filter of, is it good music? What does that mean? You know, all of those sorts of things of being able to rediscover music that we may have lost before, but we have the ability to bring it back and make it live and make it real. But then also, I know for students, talking to a real living composer who is so powerful, to talk about where did they get their ideas from, how do they do, what's their process. It's like talking to a writer or a movie maker or something like that. I think we need to do as much as we can, very much for all of our composers, particularly in Australia, to help paint that newer picture, and also then talk about the history, to go, why has this particular piece kicked on? What's the history of that as well?
I remember a great class when I was in music in Year 10, and it was our project that we'd been studying the Rite of Spring. That was the first time I heard it, was in a classroom, and Mozart Symphony 41. And our final project was that we had to do a debate, and the debate was that Mozart will be remembered and Stravinsky will be forgotten. And it was such an amazing question that you could put any two pieces of music in to think about the ideas that we're talking about now. Why does something live on? Why might something be forgotten? What is the value of these two different things? And I'll never forget that conversation. And I was really dramatic, and I think I threw a score across the room or something. It's part of my speech. I can't even remember who I was arguing for, but it was very fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good thing. All right, we are on to our last question. Should school orchestras and ensembles still play core classical music? What do we mean by core? Well, having just come from our last question.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. The canon of classical music has changed. Well, some would argue not enough, but it has changed. Continues to evolve. Mahler wasn't played before 1960. How much Mahler do we have in the world now? I'd say plenty. I guess the question around this is why, Should
school orchestras and ensembles still play core classical repertoire?
What's it teaching us? Why is it important to... And this comes down to taste. I don't mind what the music is, really, as long as it's great music. and I think great music exists in many different forms. We have the core repertoire that is acknowledged as great music, and even if the young players can't play it, they should still try and play it, in my opinion, because it just represents a really high watermark of artistic achievement and aesthetic that I think it's good for them to connect with, because that builds their taste. Even if they don't like it, it builds their taste. Their likes and their dislikes go to making them who they will be as artists, as creative minds. And I still think it's got a role to play in that, because it stood the test of time. It's so loved and adored by people, and it's so powerful that, yes, I think we should give them that experience as part of a full education.
I think I come at it from a different angle, which is there's so much repertoire as a teacher to choose from, and then you've only got time to pick a couple of them to go into depth. And then the ones I know I pick are ones that, going back to the concepts question, that will embody all of those, or will have something that's really interesting about all of those. But then I know if I've done a good job, if that student can then listen to another piece that might not be part of the core repertoire and can understand the building blocks that went into that, but also how the rules were broken, the rules were kept, all of those sorts of things. My hope is by listening to the core one, whatever core means, they can then go into other repertoire and appreciate it. I love it when I get a student from the point of saying, you play something and they go, I don't like it. I like it when I can get them from, I don't like it, but I can appreciate it. Because that separates out what they think personally versus what they understand as a musically trained student. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the other question that we're always asking as teachers when we pick repertoire, maybe different to if we were picking it for the MSO, is what do I want the students to learn is always the first question. And that aesthetics is part of that. But thinking about, well, what concepts do they need to learn? What techniques do they need to be able to develop on their instrument? And I'm always looking at what they can't do. That's the next piece that I have to find, is the thing that's going to develop that. And I think one of the traps, because lots of our school ensembles are put under pressure to perform a lot in public in all sorts of different ways, is that it's really easy to revert to the other side of, I'm just going to pick stuff that makes them sound good, that they can do easily. And I think, in fact, our job as educators is to challenge the students to keep growing and improving. So starting with that question of what do I want them to learn, which helps narrow the scope a bit of all of the music that's available, and then passing it through that filter of it has to be good music. And I remember very early on in my conducting and teaching journey, I read this great quote, which was, beware when you give your students great music, because then they will demand nothing less.
Brilliant.
Great music.
We should end on that quote. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Ben and Ingrid. And thank you very much to you for all your questions. These were awesome questions. And I like the feeling of coming on stage not prepared, but being able to explore ideas and think about where classical music sits for, the next generation of Australians. Thank you.
And we're out. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you, guys.